Companies are starting to follow suit of Bud Light. So we have North Face, now we have Target. In this story, I'm covering Target. Now, Target, they've been doing this for years. They have had LGBT clothing in different sections of Target. And a person saw this as they were in Target, of course, in the store, and they recorded it and posted it on their social media. Now, this person wasn't political. This person was just saying that Target was targeting young children with tuck-friendly clothing and other clothing of the sort. And they posted it. It went viral. Now, the original social media account holder, they got banned. She got banned. But this was too much to contain. Everyone was spreading this on social media. This was, I believe it started off on Instagram and went everywhere else. So this became a trend. People started going to Target, their local Targets, and they started going to the LGBT section to see if they were actually targeting young children. And they were recording it, sharing it, and this has massive backlash now on Target. Their stock has gone down. They've lost sales. We actually have people on the right, conservatives, boycotting a corporation for once. This is surprising, especially since Target has had this for years. They've had it for a long time. It's coming up on Pride Month. That's why all this clothing is rising up. But it's surprising, and this might be a derivative of the Bud Light situation where conservatives are now evaluating other companies, and they're saying, okay, these companies are no longer serving us. They're portraying distorted ideology to children, which, they're minors, right? They're under 18, depends on the state you're in, 18, 17, 16, but they're actually targeting people who are 12 and under. They're targeting very young children. And they're targeting these children to manipulate them psychologically to think that everyone should be part of this demographic, when really this demographic is a minority. Now, that's not to remove opportunity from the minority of the population, but it's different when you're trying to spread this ideology to the entire population and have everyone be coerced, in a sense, to that ideology. This now gets distorted even further because the culture affects political policy. Political policy can only be enacted when culture has adjusted to it. For example, we go back in time, the Supreme Court ruled that if you're gay, if you're homosexual, you can have a marriage. You can have a civil union that is recognized by the state and you get a marriage license. This was only acceptable once let's just say 51% of the population was okay with it, for the Supreme Court to rule, okay, now that culture is okay with it, we can have our ruling, and this will now be determined in political policy. And we can have a whole conversation of, well, why stop at two gay men, traditionally man-woman, now two gay men? Why not make it further, right? Why not have one guy and five girls, or three girls and five guys? The civil union, I already have a whole issue with the state coming in and intervening itself into relationships because there's very few benefits. There's some tax deduction benefits, some spousal benefits. A radical example would be if you're on life support, the spouse gets to determine which direction they want to go in that situation. But that's really a contract issue. The state is coming in for no absolute reason, and then you're really adjusting the goalposts of what the criteria is for marriage. Something that was traditionally religious and spiritual now becoming a state issue. That shouldn't be the case. Anyone should be able to do whatever they want in any kind of union. That's called a contract. Going back to the situation with Target, we're actually seeing conservatives understand that when there's manipulation of young children, this changes culture. And then when you have a growing population of people who are brainwashed and they adjust the culture, even if it's short-lived, and short-lived could mean 5, 10, 15 years, right? That's fairly a long time when people evaluate it, but it's actually a very short amount of time when you look at the macro timeline, because macro timelines operate in hundreds of years. If you're looking at how empires come and go, how nations come and go, how states change, that takes hundreds, if not thousands of years for all of these empires and kingdoms to come and go, be obliterated, fall, have political corruption, financial corruption, they collapse, other countries come in, they subvert it, or maybe they come in overtly and physically take the state. So that happens in a timeline of hundreds of years. But what's happening right now in 5, 10, 15-year increments is still very important. When you change culture, you adjust the policy like we're seeing now with hospitals who are doing underage surgery and hormone intervention with minors. And now what you're doing, even if it's the parents who are advocating for this, so the biological parents, they're coming in and they're giving consent for surgeries or hormone intervention, you're removing the biological processes for that child. You're essentially removing and degrading individual rights of that child because that is their look. We can argue why we're here in this world. There are philosophical, spiritual, religious, existential, idealistic, different reasons why we're here. And some of those reasons, well, a lot of those reasons are heavily subjective. But an objective metric is we are here biologically to reproduce. Now, that doesn't mean you have to reproduce, but generally we're here to reproduce, that we have an innate desire to reproduce with the opposite sex so we can propagate the species and more specifically propagate our own lineage. We have certain DNA, we want our DNA to naturally survive, and so that's why you have the survival of the fittest, which is the most adaptable in the species, end up surviving, or end up reproducing, and now you have survival long term. If you remove these biological processes or create an impediment or an obstacle or a blockage, what you're doing as a parent, even as a biological parent, you are essentially castrating and stopping your own lineage, where for millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, you've been the product of evolution of your ancestors over time. Different creatures, different animals, different organisms, to the point where you're here now. Now you're essentially cutting that lineage off, which is, what you're doing is you're going against the whole reason why you're here biologically. Now, that's one thing for the parents to have that ideology. It's another for a kid who's not developed. Our brains don't develop typically until around age 25, but even then, there's a give or take, right? You're still developing, you're still coming up with new ideas, you're still seeing the different perspectives of the world, you're still developing, in a sense, your person, your character. When you're in single digits or double digits, you're 8 or you're 12, you have very little understanding of the world around you compared to your peak potential. And your peak potential, let's say, is you're 28 years old. If you're 8 years old compared to when you're 28 years old, at 28 years old, you will have more lived experience. You'll be empathetic to other people's experiences, so you'll have gained wisdom. You'll have more knowledge because hopefully you've consumed information. You've had a certain type of discernment of the information to come up with certain conclusions. You'll be, by the definition, smarter with all those things than you were at 8 years old to make a life-changing, irreversible decision. So to be coerced into making that decision at 8 years old, or even if you're voluntarily at 8 years old saying that you want to go through this process, you're not at the stage of life where that is acceptable. Because for society or institutions or government to remove that from you means that now they're removing the biological processes of which what would grant you biological reproduction in the future. Not even that, but if you do hormone blockers, let's say, you're stopping your development. You may not go through puberty, or if you're in the middle of puberty, you're creating intervention. So you're not going to be fully formed, fully developed. That is such a disservice to people who are the next generation. Now, there are other things that parents can do, even though we may not condone it, we may not agree with it, but it is constitutional. If they want to take their kids to a drag queen show and have drag queens read to their kids, I don't agree with it. Many people don't agree with it because still you're creating a distorted ideology to these children. But the parents have a right to, for lack of a better term, indoctrinate their children with whatever beliefs that they deem are acceptable. The nuance is this is 50% of their DNA. You have two parents, 100% of their DNA, where this is the biological parents, not a guardian. That is acceptable from a constitutional point of view. It is not acceptable from a cultural point of view. We can speak out against that. But to have distorted ideology, which now intervenes itself physically with irreversible damage and lifelong treatment that could cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, now giving these corporations, these hospitals, a lifelong patient, they know that you are now dependent on them for the rest of your life. So they can give you medication, more surgeries. This is great for the hospitals. So it's a positive notion to finally see conservatives actually rise up and voice out, not just through social media, but voice out in general against corporations who are doing cultural harm to especially children. That's kind of where people have, that's where you kind of cross the line with a lot of people, especially parents. Once you start getting to the children, now people rise up. People are okay, well, they're more okay when it's just you attacking them from a cultural point of view. But once you go after the kids, a lot of people are going to say, hold on, this is my lineage, I would give my life for these kids, and now you're trying to attack them in they're not even being covert about it, they're being overt about it. Now Target has come in and has taken these LGBT sections for minors, okay? It's different if it's LGBT in general, but this is targeting minors. And they've put these clothing in the back of the store, like they've hidden the clothes. but they're still supporting this community for minors. So it's still a problem. Now, Target is not a special place. There's not proprietary products. I mean, I'm sure there are proprietary products, but they're not essential towards most people's lives. So a lot of people can find substitutes. The same with Bud Light. There are plenty of other beers out there. I will say that Anheuser-Busch, which is the main company that owns Bud Light, they also have other companies like Stella, Corona, all that. So you still have to be selective, but maybe this is a good reason to quit alcohol in general. Regardless, we're in the midst of a cultural war. I've already said how cultural affects political policy. So yes, it's important to focus on policy, limited government, lower taxes, better product and services, more transparency between companies, removing the middleman. Like, for example, we have such a big middleman in the medical and healthcare industry. That's why our prices are extremely high. Or we give patents to pharmaceutical companies, and the patent lasts for 20 years. Sometimes they can extend it. And so they can sell a drug for $1,000 when it really should be like $10, right? And we have to, it's a little bit more complicated than that because we have to incentivize companies to come out with substances that would greatly help people, whether it's like cancer treatment or diabetes, something like that. But we need to figure out a way where this can be integrated into the free market. Instead, we have a middleman, oligopoly, sometimes straight up monopolies, and this puts a lot of stress on the individual. So that's from a policy point of view. Okay, we can address that, right? But the main thing is culture. When we're not tackling culture, and largely culture is a derivative of media, right? Because you can have people who are proponents or puppet masters of media, and they know when they adjust media, when people watch when people watch movies from Hollywood, they're getting a certain idea of something. When people watch James Bond, what are they thinking? Especially if you're a guy, when you're watching James Bond, James Bond is hitting on all the innate ideologies, or I don't even say ideology, all the innate traits that men are trying to strive for to display in their own life. So James Bond is hitting all the, I don't want to say pain points, but all the right buttons that guys resonate with. So they see an attractive girl or multiple attractive girls. They see a guy who's well kept. He has some flaws. He's muscular. He knows how to handle himself well with other men. He's the hero, right? The hero's journey. Hollywood knows how to manipulate people if they understand storytelling, if they understand how we operate biologically, right? Like you can't go and play a story in front of an ant, like the hero's journey. The ant is not going to understand because the biology of the ant is not to understand the hero's journey. Whereas with humans, we've evolved with storytelling. We've evolved with the hero's journey. And so when we create that in motion picture, that resonates with most people, most of the population. Now it's just about execution, details, how you create the story, the different characters. So when we understand that media can effectively sway culture, and it's not just media, there are celebrities, politicians, different people, different entities, different institutions that also push against culture to gear it in a certain way. We understand how culture is moving and why culture is moving in a certain direction. I want to mention this very briefly because we're on certain platforms, we can't go into it too much, but there's a certain agenda here from the top down. Now, the agenda with the whole LGBT thing, especially when it's targeting underage kids, is, well, I'll say one of the agendas is a eugenic agenda. People can Google that. I'm not going to go into it too much, but this has been a common phenomenon that has been covert behind the scenes even before World War II. This actually erupted from Britain and even America in the early or late 1800s, early 1900s. And that fostered ideas for other nations to do what they did, not so good things. But when we understand that there are certain people, and this is not just America and Britain, like most ethnic groups, most countries, they have an idea of what they want to propagate in the world, what kind of people they want to succeed them. And so naturally, they're going to want their own lineage to succeed them. And so they will target in subversion ways, going after populations of people who they don't like, people who don't align with their interests, people who they think they're superior than from a national ethnic point of view. And they will see, it's a trickling down effect. It's not like you have a nation go to Target and say, hey, we want you to do this. I mean, it could be as simple as that, but it's more convoluted than that. Target is the byproduct of multiple interests coming together to form an agenda from a cultural point of view, and then Target jumps on the boat because they have marketing directors and of course you have the C-suite executives who think that this is a good idea. And so it's no longer about a financial incentive because everyone is aligning themselves with the ESG score or corporate equity, inclusion, inclusivity. Like it's all about inclusivity. It's all about equity. It's all about tying those together with corporatism. Not so much about financial gain because all these corporations will win because they're aligning themselves with the bigger agenda and with the federal government and they can print more money. It's all about ideology. And if they can get rid or they can select, here's a better way of putting it. We have natural selection. If they can do artificial selection, right? With dogs for the past 10,000 years, I believe this is the quickest time that we've ever had artificial selection integrated to the result that we have now, where we had wolves. Now we have all these different breeds of dogs. And by the way, a lot of these breeds of dogs, I mean, it's not healthy the way we're breeding them, like the bulldogs and French bulldogs, their noses are stuffed in, right? That's not healthy for them. Anyways, 10,000 years of artificial selection, humans integrating themselves with wolves. You had the submissive wolves that would be around the camp or coming close to the camp. And over time, now we've bred different breeds of dogs. We do that with plants as well. That's how we get the bananas that we have. You know, they're long, they're juicy, they're sugary. These are not the same bananas we had 10, 15, 20,000 years ago. So artificial selection is not a new phenomenon. People have the ideology of that, and they want to implant that into the population of what they want to succeed in the world. So they're just using that. Again, this is just one top-down agenda, but it's a major one. They're using that as a way to propagate this into culture, and then culture will do its thing. I'm trying to paint a very linear way of A, B to C. But like I said, it's more convoluted, it's more intricate than that. That's just one thing to keep in mind. Now, regardless of that, regardless of the top-down agenda, if you're just an everyday person, girl or guy, you have kids, you don't have kids, you want to have kids in the future, maybe you don't want to have kids, but you understand that there's a certain cultural agenda and it's not so good for the future of the next generation, speak out, vote with your dollar. Yes, you can be politically active, but this is more of a cultural degradation point of view. Anything you can do, even if it's something minor, even if it's something as just something as small as just speaking out on social media, speaking with your friends, do something, be part of the solution, don't be part of the problem, because if we let culture get rampant in a degradation, the way it's degrading right now, the future generations are going to have to contend with something that is extremely difficult, that humans, for the longest time, maybe not since the peak of the Roman Empire where everything went to hell, the next generation, the next 1 to 3 generations, will have to contend with something that is so difficult to face. It's going to have serious ramifications on the United States of America. And the U.S. may not exist anymore, which is that's kind of one of the goals of other nations intervening themselves in the U.S.'s cultural identity. When we recognize that and we understand, okay, maybe we're not going to live another 100 years, right? We all might perish by then. But what about our kids? What about our nephews? What about people we're related to or people we're not related to? Just from a species point of view, in general, how do we want to leave this world behind? We want to leave it better than when we came in. Hopefully we can make some kind of positive impact. So when we recognize that there are nefarious acts that are occurring, this is a way where we can, I know everyone's busy, everyone's working, everyone's dealing with family, everyone has ups and downs, everyone has their own problems. But this is a macro problem. And if there's anything that we can do to solve even 1% of this problem, that's our duty.